Manfred Steinfeld looks across the once familiar landscape of his childhood. Now 78 years old, he recently came back to a Germany he hasn't seen in decades. Searching for his roots, Manfred is looking for answers to questions. Some questions which have plagued him for ages, some only recently. On the outskirts of the small town where he grew up, Manfred searches for what was once the highly visible Jewish cemetery. But it isn't always so easy to find a Jewish graveyard in Germany.
Zum Rathaus und dann rechts?
Genau, zum Rathaus und dann rechts runter, durch Rauschenberg durch. Hinten ist auf der einen Seite ist der Tennisplatz und der Reithalle und links ist der jüdische Friedhof.
Jacob, you find out right away. I don't know what this is. Well, we can climb underneath. This is it. It's smaller today than this is my grandfather's grave right here, a monument cutting. My grandmother, she should have been buried right along here, and all of a sudden, her stone is missing. I think this cemetery has been desecrated. I wonder who this was. Well, I have to take a stone. Say quick player, Yiskadav, Yiskadashamela, Bobom, Kiz, or Yamni from Alka, say, Hagan, Yamni, so about this one. Well, I shall remember you for a moment. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here. And I'm really surprised the terrible shape this cemetery is in.
Manfred Steinfeld is the ideal American. The classic success story of the American dream. An immigrant becomes self-made millionaire. He is the founder of Shelby Williams, a highly successful furniture business. But his story is much more than this. It is more than his business successes, or his being a philanthropist and a leader in the Jewish community. It goes beyond his many achievements and accomplishments that include being a recipient of the prestigious Horatio Alger Award for Distinguished Americans. It is more than 50 years of happy marriage to his adoring wife, Fern. Even more than being the head of a loving family.
Major in kinesiology, you know how difficult it is? Maybe not at the top of his class.
Like many other German Jews of his generation, Manfred lost all his closest kin during and just after World War II. With his prosperity, he did what he could over the years to keep the memory of his relatives alive.
It's my honor to be able to do it.
But the more recent loss of his 7-year-old grandson Danny to leukemia devastated him.
A few weeks before he said, God needs more workers in heaven.
Even monuments were not enough.
I'm sorry that I'm freaking out. I hope that and when he came down with leukemia, when he passed away, there was shattering. It just...
Danny's death hit Manfred very hard. It caused him to look back at his past, to his own childhood, and to how close he'd actually been to death himself, and to the loved ones he lost back then. It triggered reflections of his past, and made him decide to embark on a journey to rediscover his roots. Knowing only the basic facts about the fate of those he left behind, Manfred had no idea what he was about to uncover as he set out to take a new look at his life. A life in which he's been both victim and victor.
Wait till you come to the sign where we make a left turn here. Right here, see it? This is the town I was born in. This is the metropolis where I was born, my birthplace. This town is the typical small town that you find throughout this part of Germany. Can you imagine this town being 800 years old? It's hard to believe.
Manfred has many memories from his boyhood in Josbach during the early 1930s.
One of the pleasant memories I had, we used to pick apples, we used to pick plums. And the first money I've ever earned was picking blueberries and selling the blueberries by the quart. Wo wohnt der Henkel?
Manfred is going to meet one of his old childhood friends, Hans Henkel, whom he hasn't seen for many years.
He lives here.
He's not sure of what kind of reception he'll receive.
Hello.
Hello.
Hans.
Hallo,
I'm late.
herzlich willkommen in
I'm late.
Josbach. Herzlich willkommen in Josbach.
Hello.
Ja.
A warm welcome greets Manfred, and inside are others waiting to reminisce about the old times.
Erst Heinrich Buxheim.
Oh, Heinrich Buxheim. Aber dein Vater hat doch auch in Amerika gewohnt. Na,
Ja, ist in Amerika geboren.
yeah. Well, Herman, how are you?
See you. I'm fine. How are you?
Okay.
A pleasant surprise for Manfred is seeing Hans's son, Herman.
They had to change equipment.
Herman had worked for Manfred's furniture company several years back in the United States.
And you came from Kassel?
Machen wir einen Vorschlag.
Ja. Hier sind noch Bilder. Das Herbert
Herbert.
und Irmchen
Irmchen.
und da war es Madakaten.
Das ist die Irmchen, das ist Malakat.
Oh, das ist ein schönes Buch.
Das kriegst du von uns mit.
Okay.
Gell? Siehst du?
Here's my mother, my sister,
Aber wo bist du dann?
me, my brother, my grandmother. So we're recognized in the 800th anniversary of this town.
As far back as the late 1700s, two large Jewish families, the Steinfelds and Kattens, settled in several small villages in the Hessen region of Germany, near Frankfurt. Throughout the centuries, the families kept in close contact, celebrating religious holidays and family events together. Manfred's mother, Paula Katten, was born in 900-year-old Rauschenberg, while Manfred's father, Adolf Steinfeld, was born and raised in Josbach. Adolf Steinfeld died of pneumonia when Manfred was just a young boy. Walking the streets of Josbach, Manfred well remembers how the town was then.
There were 6 Jewish families in this town. 3 Kattens and 3 Steinfelds. This house was owned by Hermann Katten, and this one was Sally Katten.
Das stand hier.
There was a matzah bakery in town. They served the whole province of Hesse, and originally owned by Steinfelds. There was 3 Steinfelds from this town who were killed in World War I. Any Kattens killed?
Katten ist keiner drauf.
Nein. Die Kattens waren Lauschenberg und Halsdorf.
Levi Steinfeld, Sally Steinfeld, Isidor Steinfeld, Neurath.
Manfred arrives at the home he was born in over 75 years ago. But it no longer houses the family dry goods store.
The store used to be right there with a separate entrance.
During World War II, the Nazis forced the Steinfelds to sell their house. And since then, it has been lived in by different families.
You speak any English?
No,
A little, that's okay.
ja, man dann, spricht aber Deutsch.
Ich kann.
Hallo, mein Name ist Otto.
Otto, mein Name ist Manfred Steinfeld und ich bin in diesem Haus geboren, 1924.
Das freut mich sehr. Kommen Sie rein.
Ja, danke.
Ja, so lange habe ich das aber nicht. Ich habe es jetzt 4,5.
It's been openly built.
Do you remember what was in this location?
Oh, sure, I remember exactly.
What was here? What was here?
This was the living room. My grandmother used to sit here.
Yeah.
This was a bedroom here, and there was a few steps here for another room up there, and the other side was the store, and then we had a second floor upstairs.
Yeah.
My grandmother used to sleep here, and I used to share a room with her on this side. During the 30s, 1933, when she was sick, and a doctor came from Rauschenberg, who had belonged to the SR, and he said, "It's wonderful news that Hitler has been made Vice Chancellor."
What did you think at that time?
Paid no attention to it. No one knew what was going. No one knew what was in store.
Although nobody knew it at the time, the 1933 election of Hitler would drastically change not only the lives of the Steinfelds and other European Jews, but of the whole world. With Hitler's rise to power, waves of anti-Semitism began to spread across Germany, making life ever more dangerous for the Jews. But in the small town of Josbach, change came much slower.
There was very little anti-Semitism in the town. There were a few Nazis, but I was never beaten. The only ones that were bad Nazis were the people between here and Halsdorf when we went to Saturday services. They used to put the dogs on us. However, I do remember one scene when Hitler passed through the town, and all the school children were lined up to wave Heil Hitler, and I was with the school children. I don't remember that I raised my arm. There was a degree of fanaticism that just permeated the entire society. In the summer of 1936, I spent a part of the summer vacation with my Uncle Arthur and Aunt Lena in Rauschenberg, and I was good friends with the neighbors' boys, and I was invited to attend the first meeting of the Jungvolk. When the other boys in the town found out that I was Jewish, I was promptly excluded.
Eventually, Nazism reached Josbach as well, and it became evident to Manfred's mother that things were only going to get worse. Her husband long dead, it was up to Paula Steinfeld to save her 3 children. Information on how to send children to safety outside Nazi Germany flowed quickly between the Jewish communities, and soon an opportunity arose to send Manfred to America.
The object of a Jewish mother is to take care of the children, and she was determined to save all of her children, and I was the first one to leave. This is the exact spot where I said goodbye to my mom in 1938, or I should say she said goodbye to me, because she must have had a premonition there would be a permanent goodbye and that she would never see me again. In 1938, my mother put me on the express train to Hamburg, came up the stairwell, and gave her a big hug, and she said the last instructions were to not pay any attention, to be quiet. And keep in mind, when you get off the train in Hamburg, you take out your white handkerchief. So The woman will see you with the white handkerchief in your right hand. She will have a white handkerchief in her right hand. And you go with her and she will put you up overnight and put you on the boat the next day. And that's exactly what happened. I think she had a few tears on her cheek, and she was a very devoted mother who raised 3 children. My father died when I was 5 years old. She worked very hard in very difficult surroundings, but she had that feeling that only a Jewish parent has for the kids. She just had that feeling that something terrible was in store. Maybe she had a vision of what was going to happen. 62 years is a long time, but I remember this as if it happened yesterday.
Manfred's white handkerchief saw him safely to Hamburg and all the way to Chicago, Illinois. America was unlike anything he had ever known.
In these complexes right here lived as many people as lived in the entire town. I was in a town of 419 people, 418 after I left. And by comparison, we got 400 people living right here. So you're living in a total different environment and total different society with everything available to you.
There, as part of his aunt's family in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago's South Side, he quickly made friends with the other boys his own age. One boyhood pal, Bill Dorff, is still a close friend.
We've been gone 50 years.
50 years since we've been back here. God, where did the time go? Now this is where you lived, if I remember correctly?
5409 University, right up there.
There were more people than that in that apartment.
In that apartment was his mother, their 2 children, and 2 boarders. So we had a total of 2, 4, 6, 7, and 1 bathroom.
How'd you get in the bathroom?
Yeah, well, you had to wait in line. But it served a purpose, you know. I came here, what did I know? I was 14 years old. I had a place to stay.
I remember I met you right on the corner here going to Kosminski. And I said,
you're the first guy I met, I know that.
Yeah, that I know too. I saw a strange kid. I said, where are you going? He said, I'm going to Kosminski. I said, well, come on, we'll go together.
Okay, what is your name?
Yeah, he did. We didn't know names. We introduced each other and we just went.
My English wasn't too good. I was here 6 weeks. I started in school. They didn't put me in 1st grade. They put me in 8th grade.
You remember the first semester at the branch in high school?
Oh, Mrs. Chalet?
Remember what happened to you?
It wasn't English.
Who wrote Julius Caesar?
Who wrote? You have to remind me. You have to remind me of my most embarrassing moment.
The P. Tennant knocked on the chin.
P. Tennant.
Benny Goodman, and you get up and yell.
I remember.
Goodman.
Benny Goodman. Benny Goodman wrote Julius Caesar, didn't
Right.
he? That's what I was told. And I became the laughingstock of the entire school that day. I was embarrassed as all hell. All the other German Jews associated with the Germans. And all the friends that I made, they were all Americans.
You never felt he was an immigrant?
No,
You never felt
I
you were
don't
an
think
immigrant?
we never treated him as one.
No, I was one of the boys.
Yeah.
They took advantage of me, that's the only thing.
There we go, here we go.
I remember once walking back from school and I found a $1 bill. It was you, myself, and Bill Stein.
Yeah.
And we had made a deal, we would split 50-50. Now, how do you split 3 ways 50-50?
I had 50 cents and Stein got 50 cents. And he had
I got nothing. No,
we
but
explained to you, this is how you do it in America.
Manfred learned English and found himself a job as a newspaper delivery boy, quickly catching on to the American way.
well, I used to deliver newspapers down this alley. We delivered the newspapers, they were always left on the back porch. And you had customers on the 1st and 2nd floor, it was easy. You take the paper, you would roll it up, stick it up 1st floor, step back here, get the 2nd floor. And I was hoping to have not too many customers on the 3rd floor because you had reclined steps.
The job even allowed him to save enough to send luxuries back to Germany.
I remember sending coffee back to Germany and cocoa back to Germany, and I saved enough money to buy my first radio.
In return, Manfred received a letter telling him how his younger brother Herbert had managed to escape the closing doors of the Nazi hell. Sent to a Jewish orphanage in Frankfurt, Herbert was lucky enough to be included on a list of 35 children permitted to immigrate to Palestine. In the spring of 1939, Manfred got a letter from his brother telling him how he changed his name from Herbert to his Hebrew name Naphtali on his arrival in the Palestine kibbutz farming community. Naphtali spoke proudly of the hope of building a new Jewish homeland and kibbutz life. Back in Germany, life for Jews was becoming more unbearable by the day. The fanatic events occurring in large cities had been a shock, and it was only a matter of time before even the quiet town of Josbach fell victim to Nazi madness.
Jetzt will ich da mal was sagen.
He said Kristallnacht they came and they emptied the synagogue. SR members from other towns came and they emptied the synagogue.
Ja. Haben nur alles rausgerissen,
Ja.
die Fenster eingeschlagen, aber nicht abgebrannt.
Windows were broken, but it was not burned.
Manfred's mother planned to send his sister Irma to England in September. But just 2 days before Irma was supposed to leave, Germany invaded Poland, and World War II had begun. Stranded in Germany, Manfred's mother and sister faced the onslaught of war and anti-Semitism. Assisted by some of the townspeople, like the Henkels, they hid in the small town of Josbach. But eventually the Nazis found them, and they were arrested and deported. A teenager at the time, Hans was there the day it happened.
Ein Lastwagen ohne Fenster, da haben sie deine Mutti und deine Schwester. Und wir waren doch halt.
He's given a description when they arrested my mother and sister and took her away.
Ja, eingeladen, ja.
When they took her away right here, this is where the truck was. No windows, and he remembered very distinctly.
Wir haben als Kinder dabei gestanden, haben geweint.
Everybody was crying when they were taken away. Everybody was crying when they were taken away.
It wasn't till years later that Manfred learned that his mother and sister had been deported to the Riga ghetto in Latvia. Among thousands of Jews crowded into an area less than a square mile, they lived under inhumane conditions and worked as slave laborers in the Nazi factories.
Here's a photo of my sister taken in 1937. And I have no photos after this date, with the exception when they were deported to Riga, Latvia. In one of the books on the Riga ghetto, or the history of the Jews of Latvia, there's a photo, Jewish women from the Riga ghetto on the way to work. And in this photo, I've identified my sister. Without a doubt, it's her. And looking at the side pocket of the coat this woman is wearing, with the side pocket of the coat that she was wearing in this photo in 1939. She has on the same hat and the same coat, a coat with a double flap on the pocket. That's her going to work as a forced laborer in a munition plant. This was the coat she took with her when they were deported, the coat and the hat, in fact. And she was wearing it in 1942 when this photo was taken.
Along with all the other Jews from the Riga ghetto, Manfred's mother and sister were transferred from one hell to another. Taken to Stutthof, 22 miles east of Danzig in today's Poland, they were fated to be among the tens of thousands who perished in that infamous death camp. In stark contrast, Manfred was drafted into the United States Army and became one of the few German Jews able to fight back against the Nazis. With his perfect German, Manfred was trained as an interpreter and an order of battle specialist. Promoted to staff sergeant, he was assigned to military intelligence and sent to England. Joining the 82nd Airborne Division, Manfred took part in their most bloody campaigns: Normandy, the airborne invasion of Holland at Nijmegen, and the Battle of the Bulge. Surviving them all with honor, Manny was awarded the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, and earned 5 campaign stars. During the very last days of the war, the 82nd Airborne pushed ever eastwards, slowly advancing towards the Russians, thrusting west. Between them stood the exhausted 21st German Army, nearly 500,000 men. The 82nd set up headquarters in a medieval castle in the town of Ludwigslust. On May the 1st, the 82nd's commander, General James Gavin, received a message from General von Tippelskirch of the 21st German Army. He wanted to surrender to the Americans. As General Gavin's expert on the German Army, Manfred was assigned to translate the letter of unconditional surrender of the entire 21st German Army to the 82nd Airborne.
I assisted in the translation of the document. The first paragraph is in English. The second paragraph is translated into German. Doesn't really look like much. And this is a very historic document when you consider what this represents. A very simple, one-sentence paragraph that determined the lives of 400,000 men. When they signed the unconditional surrender document, we knew that the war was over.
The next morning, as American tanks moved east and Russian tanks pushed west, the two great armies finally met.
The 82nd Airborne Reconnaissance Platoon was instructed to make the official contact with the Russians. I accompanied the platoon since I was able to speak German and some Russians, and we made the contact right here in this town, the town of Grabau.
Returning to the streets of Grabau, Manfred recalls the historic morning when his platoon met up with the Russian tank division along this street in front of the nearby town church.
That the reconnaissance platoon of the 82nd Airborne Division linked up with the Russians at approximately this spot. There was lined up 30 or 40 Russian tanks, all belonging to the unit that we made contact with. We climbed on the tanks, the Russians climbed on the tank, and everybody was in a happy mood because the war was finally over. And here's me on a Russian tank. Here's another GI smoking a cigar. Here's another American GI. And they were all very happy to post with pictures. As you can see in this picture here, there was a happy mood.
But within hours, Manfred's mood would swing from celebration to sadness as he faced his greatest test of courage, far from the battlefield. That same afternoon, the 82nd received word of the discovery of some sort of camp in the nearby town of Woblin. Rumors of death camps had already spread through the Allied army, but none of them had yet seen one. Manfred's unit was sent to evacuate the camp.
This is the stone of remembrance.
Today, the camp itself no longer exists, but accompanied by the local journalist Volker Österlen, Manfred returns to the site for the first time in over 50 years, to the place where he first witnessed the evils of the Holocaust.
So I was emotionally very much perturbed. First, I didn't even want to go in there. The one fear that I had, that among the bodies I would find my mother and sister, because there's a possibility that you can find close relatives among those still alive or among the dead. 50 years ago, you saw the camp. We drove in there in a Jeep. I was with Sergeant Wynn and a couple other GIs. All the gates were open. They were American, they were medical officers, and there were a number of other officers here trying to evacuate those who were still alive. When I entered Woblin concentration camp that afternoon, I saw several truckloads of bodies, saw some bodies emaciated, some still alive, went in the latrine of one of the barracks, saw bodies piled up, and he felt anger and sadness. This was a labor camp. This was not a camp that had a crematorium. This was not a camp that had a gas chamber. These people were supposedly enjoying much better living conditions. It was a moment of great sadness that day for me.
The horrors that Manfred witnessed that day overwhelm him, no less 50 years later.
I can't take it anymore. That's exactly the way I feel. It just, it gets to you. And I'm very strong, and I try not to be emotional about these things, but I tell you, I'm just at the point to start shaking. I don't want to relive all those moments anymore. I'm at the point where I'm just emotionally exhausted, and I don't need it. You try to be very strong, but get to the point all of a sudden that you can't take it. I was afraid this was going to happen.
Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower also visited newly discovered camps in Germany and issued a directive that all the bodies found must be given a fitting burial. Acting on that directive, General Gavin chose the medieval castle of Ludwigslust as the final resting place for the Vauban dead. By directive, the whole town was ordered to partake in the retrieval, preparations, and burial of the bodies. Manfred was there watching the townspeople, who were also ordered by Gavin to march around the graves to pay proper respect to those who were murdered only a few short miles from their homes.
The German population of this town, when this took place, felt there was an injustice that we were imposing upon the civilized Germans of this community. Absolutely, they resented it. They didn't walk through here with any type of sympathy. They walked through here because they felt what we're doing to them was an injustice to outstanding young German the families. There was no remorse.
The captured German officers who were ordered to be present were just as indifferent.
They walked through totally very stern, very military. It's one of the duties which they had to perform. Now this camp didn't only have Jews, they had Hungarians and Poles and French and political prisoners. Every fourth class had a Moken David or Star David painted on.
Returning to the Ludwigslust castle for the first time since the war, Manfred discovers that time and apathy have erased all evidence of the events that took place here only 50 years ago. Manfred is shocked to see that the 200 grave markers erected as permanent reminders of what happened here have disappeared.
There are no markers whatsoever.
No.
It is difficult to imagine what we see here, that 200 people are buried here. And I bet if you ask anybody walking down the street, they don't even know that.
I mean, from time to time in summertime, they're making barbecues on the lawn here, playing football, soccer, that. Nobody knows, no. When the American troops left Ludwigslust in 1945, they left 200 Christian crosses, and those crosses stood about 2 to 4 years. Nobody knows exactly, and well, they just vanished because they were wooden, and I think people, this is told what they did, and they just took them for heating their apartments.
Meeting the town's assistant mayor, Manfred learns of municipal plans to put granite grave markers on the lawn and rededicate a permanent memorial. Moved by this act of the local people, on the spot, Manfred writes a check to cover most of the cost.
And do you remember how the order was when they were buried?
No, they were just at random. All they did, they had wooden crosses, and on the cross they painted a Jewish star.
Yes, and the Jewish stars were not separated from
They
the
were not.
Christian crosses.
Every fourth one had,
Oh yeah.
I mean, painted on a Jewish star.
Yes.
That's all.
So you would like to do the same?
I think every fourth one ought to have on the granite a Jewish star.
Yeah. You know, in our reports, the percentage, if you
Was,
could, if you
they
could-
said at that time was 25% Jewish.
25%, yes.
It was more.
Yes.
It was more.
Was it really?
It was more, because all the ones that I met were Jewish, because they,
Yes.
I mean, they all talked to me because they knew I was a German Jew.
Yes.
At present, the only memorial to the local events in World War II is to be found at the museum of nearby Wobbelen. Here, additional bodies found at the camp were buried.
The concentration camp only existed 10 weeks. Nevertheless, more than 1,000 prisoners from many European countries could not experience the liberation of the American 82nd Airborne Division on May 2nd, 1945. I didn't know they put this memorial right here, because I didn't read about that. I knew they did this because I have a picture of it.
Manfred views the museum dedicated to the history of the Wobbelen camp. Joined by the curator, Frau Edeltraut-Schürer, Manfred is surprised to see so many details about the camp. But it is not the only surprise Manfred will experience today.
You can listen to this. I'm going to tell you a story that gives me shivers. The commanding officer of Wobbelen was previously the commanding officer of Stutthof.
Manfred knew that Stutthof was the very same camp where his mother and sister had ended up and eventually died.
Paul Werner Hoppe was responsible for building the gas chamber in Stutthof. And he was responsible for those who were unable to work. They were murdered in the gas chamber. As I read this, and this is all in German, it gives me the chills. That's the irony of it. I'm finding this out so many years later, that Stutthof and Wobbelen are so closely interconnected.
With this new information, he sets off for Poland and the death camp to see what further revelations await him. The dry facts that Manfred gathered after the war are suddenly turning into a picture before his eyes. And yet he still does not know the full details of his mother's and sister's end in Stutthof. Today, Stutthof is a memorial museum. Where the curator now sits was once the commandant's office and housed the records of thousands of prisoners. Thanks to the Nazis' meticulous record-keeping, the original files still survive, documenting the arrival, processing, and extermination of the 65,000 victims who perished within her darkened gates.
Geburtsdatum, Geburtsort, alle Informationen.
This is the original receiving report. This is the one for my sister, that's Steinfeld Irma.
Yeah.
And here is for meine Mutter, for my mother. And the reason for being in the camp, political prisoner.
Das ist die Original Personalkarte von
This
Paula.
That's her signature. That's my mother's signature. This was signed on the 1st of October 1944 when she arrived here from Riga. And it gives you all the personal history, where she was born, what her father's name was, the husband's name was, the type of education she had, and also her bodily appearance was strong. After 3 years in Riga, I can't believe that they had strong physical appearance. In looking at my sister's record, it gives you the same information. In addition to that, we have the official record here, the date she died. She died on the 10th of January 1945. She died 1 week before the camp was liberated, my sister. The reason for death, they're all marked on all of them. Heart failure due to weakness of body. There was the standard description of those who died. And this is the original Waffen-SS stamp signed by the doctor in Stuttgart. It's interesting that these two original documents, one page of this and 2 pages of this, is the history of a person. Where's the crematorium?
It is over there.
Still reading from the Vauban Museum book, Manfred hears for the first time how the Commandant Hoppe himself devised a cunning new system to lure prisoners into the gas chambers.
He took his SS personnel and gave them uniforms of the German railway workers to deceive those inmates, and told them, we're going to take you by train to Danzig. Instead, they were all murdered because the train had been converted into a gas chamber.
The wagons were also prepared as gas chambers.
It gives me the chills, I tell you, really it does. And as I find out more and I can imagine how they died and what happened to them, it does do something to your own emotions. How many people did they gas at one time?
They killed about 60 to 80 people at one time.
Hoppe believed in the purification of the race, and he was probably the worst example you can find for what he did. He was able to escape justice. Arrested by the British, not identified, went to Switzerland, came back to Germany, identified, sentenced to 10 years in prison, got out after 3 years, and then he died.
That makes you angry, doesn't it?
Especially since it's quite possible that my mother and sister were the ones who were killed, in the experimental gas chamber. Just think about it.
If you found out that Hoppe was alive today...
I get the son of a bitch. I should have become a Nazi hunter instead of becoming a furniture manufacturer. The first impulse is that you want to kill him. But that's not the answer either, It's, you don't take life because a life was taken. So how do you mete out justice?
By a strange twist of fate, Manfred did indeed get the chance to mete out justice. It happened just days after the end of the war, while he was still assigned to the military governor's office in the town of Boisenberg.
We were walking down the street and I see a woman in a concentration camp dress, the gray stripes, and she asked me, Herr Offizier, sprechen Sie Deutsch? I said, ja, ich spreche Deutsch. And she said, sehen Sie den Mann an der anderen Seite, der dort geht? Das ist ein Kriminal. War der SS-Sturmbahnführer vom Concentration Camp Ravensbrück. He didn't have his uniform on. He had civilian clothes on. He was going to get lost in the shuffle. There were millions of people who were who were all dislocated, trying to get home in any way they could. And he was just one of the homeless German civilian trying to get lost among the masses. We crossed the street and we said, Hände hoch. And he raised his hands and we arrested him. We took him into the mayor's office in here, the city hall, and he tells us who he is. He said, are you Ludwig Ramdor, SS-Sturmbahnführer, der Kommandant in Ravensbrück war? If he hadn't been arrested that day, he could have slipped away to South America.
Ramdor was turned over to the British. In 1947, Manfred read that the British military tribunal announced the hanging of war criminals. Among those on the list was Ludwig Ramdor.
Certainly gives me the satisfaction that while I was an American soldier, I performed my duties in not only a patriotic way, but in a way to give justice in whatever form it may be on the basis which they deserve. If the justice included the death sentence, that is part of performing your duties.
Shortly after, Manfred was discharged from the army and sent back to the US. He had lost his mother and sister, but at least his brother Naftali in Palestine had been fortunate enough to escape. Returning to Chicago, Manfred hoped to contact Naftali. But it turned out that life for Jews in the Holy Land was not that simple. The British, the allies of Manfred Steinfeld in Europe, turned out to be the enemies of Naftali Steinfeld. In control of Palestine since the end of World War I, the British blocked Jewish immigration since before the war, and afterwards resisted calls for an independent Jewish state. On November 26, 1945, the British went searching for illegal immigrants and suspected saboteurs in Kibbutz Givat Chaim, not far from Naftali's home at Kibbutz Shluchot. Just a few weeks later, Manfred received this letter.
I was terribly shocked when I received the first week of December this letter here, which is dated the 28th November 1945. It's in German, and it says, An Herrn Steinfeld to Mr. Steinfeld. With deepest feelings and hearty sympathy, we are notifying you that your brother Herbert Naftali was killed on the 26th November 1945 in the battle to establish the freedom of our country. It also tells me that his girlfriend Ayala Tenenbaum died side by side with him, killed at that time by the British.
Where's Naftali?
Dein Auge ist nicht mehr so gut.
Joined by his wife Fern after his trip to Europe, Manfred came to Israel to learn more about Naftali's life on kibbutz. He came to meet some of the members who knew Naftali and to hear firsthand from the people who were with him that fateful day.
On this day, I just finished work, and there was a lorry standing outside the fence, and they told us, everybody come with us, we are driving to Givat Chaim because the British military, they are surrounding Givat Chaim, so everybody goes. So all the roads around were closed by the military. We couldn't go on with the truck, so we started to go by foot. They opened the fence, and we marched. And then we came near this, so the commander of them came out of the run, and he said, "Stop! You can't go further on." So we said, "We are going to Givat Chaim." We started to go, and they started to shoot, and I was wounded there. Naftali who went on, and he ran through the fire, and I think he was hit from the back.
It's the first time Manfred visits the actual spot where his brother and Ayala died that day. After all these years, he never knew this memorial existed, honoring his brother and the others who were killed when the British opened fire on the unarmed Jews.
The fight for freedom is always quite expensive in human terms. And in The fight for freedom for the state of Israel in human terms has been staggering. And I'm sure that Naphtali knew the importance of giving his life for the state. He would have volunteered his life. Ayala Tenenbaum said, "Forward for Eretz Yisrael," and he followed and gave his life, and they were both killed.
Victims of an unnecessary military response, Naphtali and Ayala were buried together at a nearby cemetery, which Manfred always visited on his many trips to Israel.
First we gotta find it.
He always thought that this was the only place commemorating that tragic day and the death of his brother and Ayala.
To the left.
This is Ayala Tenenbaum, this is Manfred Steinfeld. Yes. At the time when you give your life, you have no idea. The only thing I like to say, you didn't give your life in vain. Because of what you did, today you have the modern state of Israel, and your life will eternally be remembered.
Coming full circle, Manfred Steinfeld returns once again to Germany to take part in the rededication service of the Ludwigslust Memorial to the Wobblen dead.
Auch die heutige Elterngeneration, die unsere Kinder erzieht und bildet, anlässlich der Verleihung der Ehrenbürgerschaft der Stadt vor einem Jahr.
The flag of the 82nd Airborne Division is presented to the town, saluting the part played by those brave American servicemen in liberating the camp.
And who liberated us.
One survivor expresses the day's emotions.
And my comrades, ex-prisoners of the camp of Berlin, greatest gratitude. Thank you, thank you, thank you for giving us our lives back.
Then Jewish survivors and liberators recite the Hebrew prayer for the dead, said in memory of all the victims of Nazi atrocities.
Ich bin ein deutscher Jude, der von seiner Mutter in 1938 nach Amerika. I am proud to be able to say a few words to you here because I felt that these victims of Nazism deserve a final resting place of honor and dignity. I stood in the same spot in 1945, right here, when these 200 people were being buried.
Manfred closes his speech by quoting the chaplain's address delivered here at the original burial service 55 years ago.
We are assembled here today before God in the sight of man to give a proper and reverent burial to the victims of atrocities committed by armed forces in the name and by the order of the German government. These 200 bodies were found by the American Army in a concentration camp 4 miles north of here. I'm honored to participate in creating this permanent resting place, and I hope that this memorial will be important for now and for all generations to come.
The Nazi Holocaust took over 6 million lives, among them Manfred's mother and sister, and the 200 victims of Wobblen he helped bury.
I think, as far as I'm concerned, I fulfilled my mission to make certain that those who perished here have a permanent memorial.
Today, as both victim and victor, this ceremony allows Manfred Steinfeld to finally put the ghosts of his past to rest and come to terms with the loss of his grandson Danny as well.
I myself want to get the closure. I want to know what happened to my mother and sister, and they were pretty much established exactly. We know where the ashes went. I know what happened to my brother, and I know what happened to our grandson. This is closure for 200 people whom I didn't know, but who now have a proper resting place. When you think back of what happened 56, 57, 60 years ago, you have to get emotional, especially with the personal loss that I suffered. But then again, I look at it this way. I'm the sole survivor of my family, and today there's 17 descendants. That's not too bad.